Hello and welcome to our today's Coffee and Consulting about Swiss workforce, work permits and labor market controls Unveiled. I hope you had all a good start already into this week and you have your coffee with you so we can discuss this topic today. My name is Friederike Ruch. I have the honor today to be your host for today's Coffee and Consulting. Before we start, there are two things I would like to inform you about. One thing is you're all unmute, so if you have any questions, then please use the chat box for it. Write down your question, and we are happy to answer that afterwards. Either we still have time during the coffee and consulting, or we will do that later by email. The other thing is, while we have our presentation, you have the possibility to download these slides, so please do so, so you have them later on as a reference. Then I would suggest we just start because I brought with me lots of different slides to cover basically the whole area around that Swiss workforce topic. The today's point is really about immigration basically and labor market controls. Now, Switzerland, we are a small country, but we do have 26 different cantons, and therefore each canton has slightly different rules. Even we have all one law based on which in each canton the immigration work will be proceeded. Still, there are different procedures, processes, as well as that we do have the three different languages which are used in the daily work. One hot topic we still have in the majority of the cantons, not in all, because some have definitely used the university graduates in Switzerland to have the possibility to have them easier accessed the labor market and therefore kind of fight against the shortage of skilled workers. There are cantons which are still using that not really, and that is my point of view, in full advantage, and still make a couple of hurdles in order to actually get them accessing the labor market. Because that is one of the possibility I see here in Switzerland we can definitely use, and we have lots of great educated graduates from the university, which we could definitely use. We still have a quota system, so in case there is the individual has a non-EU EFTA national, then definitely a quota will be used for that, as well as if we talk about assignments or secondments, then also quotas will be applicable, but then for any national independent, whether that is EU EFTA national or non-EU EFTA national. And if we talk about secondments or assignments, then one of the topics is for the huge group of business travelers, the definition of gainful employment. So sometimes it is not quite clear whether a work permit is required or not, because it's not quite clear whether the individual will perform work or gainful employment and therefore needs a work permit, or actually it's not really seen as employment or work and therefore no work permit is required. We will touch that topic in a bit later as well. And then the group of service providers or assignees the term will be used similarly. There we have the challenge that sometimes not only the highly qualified specialists need to come here to Switzerland, but also maybe the less trained one. And there's some, in some cantons at least, the problem that we won't get a work permit for those individuals, or need a huge workaround in order to get that done. The salary requirements are also something which are not really helpful, in the sense that if someone is coming from abroad and even just being assigned for a couple of days here, for those couple of days, the individual has to meet the Swiss salary requirements, and therefore additional salary has to be paid, which is sometimes a bit of a challenge. We still have the protection status as for the refugees from Ukraine, which has been also extended again for another year, which is good. However, what sometimes still gets forgotten is that in case a refugee or someone with the protection status S wants to work, the individual still needs to have a work permit, and an approval has to be requested before the individual starts to work. In case the person would like to have a permanent employment and on a long-term basis, then a change of the protection status as needs to be requested with the full review of job search, as well as showing and proving that there's nobody else available for that position. Otherwise, if someone wants to work under the protection status S, then just the Swiss label and salary conditions have to be considered. Local employment is a huge area, and there is lots of different work patterns can be included in that. The majority, or the main point, is that there is a Swiss employment contract is the basis for it. And then it depends a bit on what kind of national you would like to hire, or the Swiss employer wants to hire. And depending on that, there are different work permits to be considered. For EU EFTA nationals, and you find that on the right hand in that box, we do have in general B&L permits, as well as in case somebody would like to remain living in the country abroad and not moving to Switzerland fully, then the cross-border permit or G permit is available. Usually those are for 5 years. Also the B permit is for 5 years. Depends on basically on the employment contract that determines the period of the permit type. For non-EU EFTA nationals, we do have also the B&L permit as well as the G permit, and there you see it is just for 1 year, because each year then that should be reviewed, and we will look in a second how that will be reviewed. As well as there's the possibility of a management transfer permit, which is a bit of a special case and only possible in case somebody has worked before in the same firm and then is moving here to Switzerland to the Swiss legal entity. On top of it, there is that obligation of job registration. In German, we call that Stellenmeldepflicht, which is, depending on the position and the unemployment rates, still something which you need to do independent whether you would like to hire an EU EFTA national or a non-EU EFTA national. So we still have to look each time about the unemployment rates. Looking at the unemployment rates, the importance of it might decrease even, but still it's something you always have to keep in mind. And as said earlier, we have a quota system. If we talk about local employment, then that is for UK nationals as well as any other non-EU EFTA national. For EU EFTA nationals, we don't have a quota. If we talk about quotas, then we get sometimes the question whether that is the problem or the point why an application will be denied. And I can say that in the last 3 to 4 years, I would say there was never an issue about the quota. So if an application for a work permit will be denied, then definitely that will be a different reason for it, but not the quota. If we want to hire in Switzerland a non-EU EFTA national, then definitely that individual needs to be a specialist in that field. So we do have to look at the qualification and what the interpretation is of a specialist. Usually we talk about someone who has at least 2 to 3 years of work experience and the university degree in that area, or someone who has maybe no university degree, but at least 10 years of work experience. That is about what a specialist is. We do have to look at the local specific salary conditions, and we will look at the tool the cantonal authorities are using in a moment when we talk about assignments. It is the same system we have to look at here again. The job registration requirement, that is something you definitely have to look at whether that is required. And then the job search is one of the key areas we need to focus on, because that is usually what the authority will hold against us in case we haven't done that properly. Basically, the job search means that in Switzerland you have really tried whatever you can to find an adequate person or the right person for that position, but in the end you came to the conclusion that there is no EU EFTA national for that position, and therefore you thought about the one or the other candidate on who applied for the job who is a non-EU EFTA national. And you will have, when you file the application for that individual, you have to show that all the applicants on a list with the reason why you haven't hired them. The requirements for hiring non-EU EFTA nationals from an immigration perspective, it is that there needs to be a macroeconomic interest in it. So the authority need to see there is some benefit for it. We have to prove the priority of Swiss and EU EFTA nationals, which I just started with the part about the job search, and where we come in a second. Wage and working conditions, the personal requirements of being a specialist or a highly qualified person, as well as the quota part. Job search, and that is also not in each canton it will be done in the similar way. In most of the German-speaking cantons, you will have to do a job advertisement, and you will have to place it on the RAF EURES page, as well as 2 other further external platforms. If you just put it on your own website, then the authority will say that is rather passive job search and not active one, and therefore they will not allow that. Usually you have to do that for 2 to 3 months, proving that there's definitely no EU EFTA national or Swiss national fitting for that position. Sometimes you also can go and go to the authority and say maybe after months, in case they had only a few applications, then say there is really nobody else on the job market, and whether you can stop already after 1 month. Management transfer, I said earlier, that is one special case, and that is really if it is an intra-company transfer. So the individual needs to be on a management level, in a management position abroad, and had been working in that position for at least 12 months before moving to Switzerland. And in Switzerland as well, the individual needs to be in a management position working here. And then we can get a work permit for that individual for a period of 4 years, with the fact, or with the consequence that we don't have to show any kind of search efforts, which is quite good, because if you look at the search efforts, how long that takes, we have to consider 2 to 3 months, so we can kind of skip that part and therefore have the individual quicker being work authorized in Switzerland. Usually that's just for 4 years. There are in certain cases a possibility even to have that extended, but some of the cantons are quite restrictive in that regard. Cross-border employment as one of the last things about or topics regarding local employment. Here we talk about people working in Switzerland, being employed in Switzerland, but living outside of Switzerland. The usual cases are people living either in Germany, Austria, Liechtenstein, Italy, or France. For EU EFTA nationals, it's a quite simple process. We can get that cross-border permit as long as we show that the individual is still residing abroad, as well as the local Swiss employment and salary conditions are met. Still, the job registration application has to be reviewed even for cross-border employment, but that's just a minor issue. Based on the agreement of free movement, EU EFTA nationals only have to return once a week back to their home, so someone could also stay during the week in Switzerland and still have a cross-border permit. However, some of the cantons have now changed a bit their process and will issue a B permit instead, but that depends a bit on the commune or canton. For non-EU EFTA nationals, there's also the possibility to get cross-border permit. However, they have to follow, or for those who have to follow the rules for hiring a non-EU EFTA national, so the individual still needs to be a specialist. Still, you need to do the job search. You have to write an application, and then on top, which makes it a bit more difficult, we still have border zones, and for non-EU EFTA nationals, they're still applying. So an individual needs to live in the border zone and work in the corresponding border zone in Switzerland. And there it is sometimes quite tricky, because depending on where you work, other border zones are applicable. The individual also has to live at least for 6 months already in that area, which also makes it sometimes a bit difficult. And therefore you think about that maybe the moving to Switzerland might even the better situation or the better outcome, because then the individual is a bit freer in where he works in Switzerland. And also if you talk about German or someone living in Germany, definitely from a tax point of view, that is also beneficial for the individual. And maybe that is also the reason why um, we have, or I had, maybe in the last 10 years, only two cases where the client wanted to get a cross-border work permit for a non-EU EFTA national. We will leave now the part about local employment and move to assignments or posted workers. And there you see the requirements here. We looked at the local employment requirements before, and there you see the only difference basically is that we don't have to show the priority for Swiss or EU EFTA nationals, meaning we don't have to do the whole job search part. So we still have to file an application for it. There's still the canton would like to see an economic value for them. We still have to look at wage and working conditions, that they are considered and fulfilled, as well as that the individual is a highly qualified specialist, and that's the basis basically for getting the work permit, as well as the applicable quota needs to be there. In regard to compensation, we do have the Posted Workers Act, and based on that, we have the situation that for individuals coming to Switzerland, we not just need to consider the mandatory regulations which are listed down here, like working hours, holidays, rest period, night and Sunday work. We also need to consider, in regard to salary or additional compensation, a couple of things. And there is basically three things on top of the basic salary, which is, as an employer, I need to take care about the cost for a flat in Switzerland, or for the hotel cost or whatever. I can either say I would like to pay for the effective cost, or I can say I pay a lump sum. If I want to pay the lump sum, then it's 2,000 Swiss francs per month. Travel expenses I need to reimburse or pay for. Also there I can decide whether I do want to pay that effectively or with a lump sum of 300 Swiss francs per month. And then catering or lodging, so for the food during the day, I also will have to pay either effectively or the lump sum. Now those three items, I just have to pay for the first 12 months of someone being assigned to Switzerland. After those 12 months, I don't need to follow up on that. However, if I do pay the lump sum, though, which are 36,000 Swiss francs for the first year, which is quite an immense payment, which I have to add on if I assign someone from outside to Switzerland. On top of, I have to look at the Swiss salary level, and maybe you have already seen or looked at the salary calculation tool, which is quite something, and you will always see there's the median as well as the lower quartile and the higher quartile. If we talk about permits like 120 days permits, L permit or B permit, then you always have to consider the median. If we talk about the notification process, which sometimes will be used for people being assigned just for a few days, then I can use the lower quartile, which makes, from a cost point of view, also quite sense. If we talk about the huge group of business travelers, and that is still a huge topic, then we do have basically two permit options. One is the reporting procedure or notification process, as well as the 120 days permit. And you can see here the difference between if someone is employed in an EU-EFTA member state or is employed outside of the non-EU EFTA member states. If we are in the blue part, then we just have the 120 days permit available if the individual is employed at an EU-EFTA member state, and here the UK still belongs to that group. We have additional regulation at the moment in place, which allows UK or people being employed in the UK to still use also the notification process. That's the violet part underneath. Definition of employment, I said that earlier already. That is something which is the crucial part, and our advice is usually if you're not sure about it, then maybe get the clarification from the authority in order to make sure you are in line, because in the end, that is the crucial part in the beginning as well, whether you file for an application or not. In principle, as long as you do something actively, and even if that is just for an hour and the rest of the day you maybe just listen or sit in a conference, listen to it, or do something else. As soon as you do for an hour or more active work, then definitely that would be viewed as employment and a work permit should be filed for. There is that 8 days exemption rule. So if I send someone for 8 days to Switzerland in a year, then depending where I am, where the employer of the individual is situated, either I can send the individual just for 8 days to work in Switzerland without the need of a work permit. That is in case I am an employer situated outside of the EU-EFTA region. If I'm situated inside the EU-EFTA region, so in one of the EU-EFTA member states, then the 8 days are counted by employer as well as employee. So I have to consider both. So in basically, if the employer is situated in Germany, sending people to Switzerland, then after 8 days, as the German employer sending people, they are used up, and then afterwards the employee needs, as from the first day on, a work permit. Whereas if I'm situated in the US, I can send people 10 people each for 8 days without any problems and without the need of a work permit. Notification process is something which is for employees employed by an employer in the EU-EFTA, in one of the EU-EFTA member states, or as well for UK national, for the if the employer is situated in the UK. For them, we still have the same rules, which is perfect and which is a nice tool. However, in practice, we're not using that that often because there is a lot of administration behind. So if it is to work as on a client side, then that might be a good tool maybe. But if you know beforehand that somebody needs to work for longer than just a few days in Switzerland, you then maybe rather go and look for the 120 days work permit, because that might be the better option. And you have that then for a 12-month period. In that period, the individual can work for 120 days without any problems, which might be the better solution than instead of with the notification process where you have to indicate each day separately. On top of it, what you also always have to look at is about the Schengen regulation. Switzerland belongs to the Schengen area, and therefore the Schengen visa, in case the individual is subject to that, needs to be required. So in case you have someone with a 120 days permit, and he definitely needs to have a visa for that, for example, an American person, then they need to have a Schengen visa on top of it. And you have to consider the rule as well that someone can only stay in the Schengen area for up to 90 days in any 180 days. So you have to consider the rule of, in a 12-month period, being in Switzerland not more than 120 days, as well as then the Schengen rule, not staying more than 90 days in any 180 days in the Schengen area. And there we have listed down as well the Schengen member states which you need to consider. The last 2 minutes, I just want to touch the topic of labor market controls, which is quite important as the inspections are increasing in numbers, and therefore make sure that if you send people to Switzerland, then definitely you have the right work permit in place, as well as that you have calculated the equivalent Swiss salary, and that you also have paid those as well as the additional allowances. Also important is that you have considered and looked at the work hours as well as holiday entitlement, or have kind of considered that with calculating the equivalent salary part. Make sure that if someone is working on a bank holiday or a Sunday, that in addition to the work permit, you also would need to have an additional permit, so that individual is allowed to work accordingly. Also, the night permit is something, or a shift permit, you need to look at. We often get the question as well about the A1s, whether that is something which is really required and from what time point on. Basically, it is from the first day, where the A1 or the certificate of coverage is required. Make sure to have that in hand, because there is a possibility that in case the employee can't show that the inspector coming either to the office or in the end do the inspection in writing, will require to see that. And if the inspector is coming to the office and meeting the employee, then maybe the inspector will tell the employee who can't show the A1, actually you have to stop to work and go back, and that he only can continue to work as soon as he has the A1 in his hands. The sanctions are usually starting with really fines, and that is rather at the higher end, or meaning in case there are a couple of non-compliant issues, that you will be entered, or the company will be entered on the list from the SEM and SECO, as well as there is then a blockage or a ban for a certain period in which no employee can be sent to Switzerland from that entity. But beforehand, you have still time to kind of in case there is a mistake in salary calculation, or you have paid too little to the employee, you still can make up for it without any problems. And that was also in a nutshell about our today's topic. I hope you have still enjoyed your coffee during that. I can imagine that you do have a couple of more questions about it, so please use the possibility to get back to us, because it is an important topic, and we happily will answer your questions. I thank you very much for your attention today, and wish you a wonderful week, and hope to see you soon at one of our next events. Thank you very much.